Hey, it's Neil. It's June 2nd, 2024, and I had to fix the Markdown to HTML tool on walkinthewoods.llc, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Cloudflare workers, HTML rewriter, and content security policy. So if you go to walkinthewoods.llc/tool/md, you can paste some Markdown here, and when you click that button, it replaces the entire page. And you'll also notice up here the title of the page is set to the greatest header of the markdown. So if it finds a header, the first one, it sets that as a title. And what that does is when you go to print this, it makes it a little bit better in that I have your markdown title there. So I've been using this a lot. And yes, again, I like to print stuff out a little old fashioned that way. And if you hit refresh, you'll reload this. Something that I found though was, well, I went back here to use it a couple of days ago on Friday and it wasn't working. And if you look, this is Google Sites, but I'm running it through Cloudflare Workers so that I can augment things. And one of the things Google Sites doesn't really allow you to do is embed HTML and script in a way that gives you full control. And this is probably because a lot of Google sites run through the Google domains, and if they let you run any sort of script, then you could create malicious websites that run under the guise of Google. So they sandbox you. When using a custom domain, obviously I can do anything I want because I run it through Cloudflare. And so what I wanted to do was be able to take blocks like this and have this replaced with the HTML. Now, I did that, but what was happening was it wasn't executing the script, and I can actually show you this happening. So let's just return rewriter transform response. So going over to my Cloud Shell version, it's going to do the same thing. But when I try to run this, it's not going to work. And when you look at the error, it's due to content security policy. And so this was my first experience with the nonce attribute in scripts. And I thought I had this licked. I had this working yesterday, and I was like, okay, this is the best way to do it. So what I had done was if you inspect this, you'll see that I've added a nonce. And for security purposes, the nonce is hidden from you in the element view. So it shows nonce as blank, which isn't actually true. If we store this as a global variable, and notice I put a Nancy in there, and I put temp1 nonce, I can see the nonce is there. And that's also the same nonce in the content security policy. And you can verify that by going to your headers here, look at response headers and content security policy. So the what this is supposed to do is say I'm going to allow unsaved scripts and eval, but they have to have this nonce, and the nonce attribute of the script has to match what's in the content security policy. And I had that working, and you can see it's set in the script. You know, we could see it there, but it still wasn't allowing me to execute the script once it had been replaced. So I kind of went through a full refactor to understand HTML rewriter in a way that allows me to augment the stuff on the server side, because I noticed augmenting this on the client side, just using client-side JavaScript, probably for security purposes, you can't set the nonce and then be able to execute the script. At least I wasn't able to do that. So maybe that was possible in the past. Wasn't possible for me. So, but I still want to be able to execute these scripts, right? So if I look at this page, all I want to do is I want to be able to add this function for using marked to replace the page with whatever's in the text box. And I really struggled with this, which is why I'm making this video now. And the thing that I didn't want to do, I ended up doing, and you can see it here in the code, and that's I'll take that entire response and then I'll delete the content security policy header so that then it can operate correctly. the thing that I wanted to mention here with HTML Rewriter is I have two passes in my code, and the first pass is to just look at everything, to scan it. And so in order to do two passes, I have to clone the response, and then I get the text output. But I'm ignoring the output here, and I could probably just do an await on this, await on dot transform. Anyway, the second pass actually changes things, and one of the things that I change is I change the title of the page. I might modify some of the images in the page, and that gives me more control over my Google Sites when it's run through my custom domain. I like to modify the title so it doesn't have the site title and then the page title, because that just, when you look at it in your tabs, it's ugly, right? You can't see what page you're on, you just see what site you're on. I'd rather have it page and then title, uh, full site title. And lastly, the div, and this is where the fancy stuff comes into play. If you remember my previous video, I had created an unveil HTML function which uses string manipulation, and I really wanted to try to work with Cloudflare's HTML rewriter, but it's difficult. And the reason that it's really difficult is you can't tell. So I'm getting a div here. In this case, if I say on div and then element element, all I get is divs in this case. The div inside the first div, but I can't set the inner content or use replace on that div when I get to the end tag of that div because it's already streamed through. Not only that, but the element reference is transient to just this function. But what I can tell is, since my first pass is just scanning, the order of the tags is going to be exactly the same. And what I did is I created a map of all the divs, and the div key is just an increment. It's just an integer. And each time that I find a div, I just say, okay, I'm moving to the next one. And that allows me to create a map in the first pass of all the text and all the divs. Okay, yeah, so all the text chunks and all the divs down to the last one. So what I'm looking for is the nearest div to where my content is the one that I want to replace. And that's what this ends up doing. And then in the second pass, when I get to that div and I say, okay, I found that this is the div number, and it's got my little magic marker in it, which is the HTML comment, that's when I convert it to plain text. And you'll notice also from the first scan, I've got the nonce. And so that's what I pass here. And as a nice little extra that didn't end up working, I save, oh, I have raw running. It's like, okay, what's going on here? I save it in just a window variable. So if you do script nonce as a global, right, then you'll see the nonce there. And even though I got that matching up, and I had it working yesterday morning, later on in the day it stopped working. So maybe there's other security policies that Google is starting to institute, which is good for them. And it forced me to learn more about this. And then the last thing, obviously, is I'm just deleting the content security policy header so that I can execute whatever scripts that I want. And then, so the final thing is, you'll notice I'm using this at raw. If there's any query string, then it doesn't do any of my executing, right? It just actually just leaves the document as is, and also allows me to see what the actual headers were coming from Google Sites. And this actually helps me when I'm developing, because the inner site that I'm fetching from is my main domain. And then on Cloudflare, when you're on your main domain and your worker is fetching from the same domain, it goes to the middleware, like the next piece, which would be Google Sites. But when I'm on dev, dev will draw from production. And so what I do is, when you don't have raw specified and it goes to process, it will add the raw attribute internally so that it's pulling from production with raw, and therefore getting the raw Google Site stuff. Otherwise, you get what's currently on production modified by my worker, and then my dev thing tries to modify the modified stuff, and all kinds of craziness happens. So long story short, the tool is working again, and it's I hate to use this word, I think it's more robust than it was before. And there's some more options there that I thought about adding. For example, you might notice when I first load this page, sometimes there's a box that shows up, a strange border, and I'm not going to be able to get that now. And part of that is because some of these divs have other styling attributes in the classes. And so one of the things that I thought about doing was having it work itself up to keep going and say, okay, this div is empty other than my text. This div is empty other than my text, and get it up to some point, maybe the JS controller, and then replace it from here. Because I'm not actually sure what each of these divs is doing. However, I did note that replacing it where I am works when you go on mobile, which is really what I want. I want everything to look good on mobile too. So there you have it. Go use the Markdown to HTML tool on walkinthewoods.llc. That's just walkinthewoods.llc/tool/md. And it'll continue to be free so long as I can support it as such. I don't anticipate that changing. And hopefully this helps if you're using Cloudflare Workers and trying to figure out HTML rewriter. Feel free to drop me a line and I can help you debug stuff. Ciao.